Dr. Kimberly Harms, a very, very warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. It's great to be here.
Kimberly, I can't wait to have this conversation with you. You, I think, are the true definition of how we should all think about retirement going forward. And I'm going to come back to that word, retirement, in a second, because you, as an international speaker that specialises in grief and conflict resolution and ultimately legacy planning, you are now entering into what you call, I think, your fourth quarter, and you are now living and breathing this kind of phase of life, as well as helping others do the same. So I would love for you to let me and the listeners know exactly how you got to where you are, because I think it's a really interesting story. That's, one of the reasons why it's Dr. Kimberly Harms is there's a reason behind that, and how you are now defining this retirement thing and how you're taking people through that. And then ultimately we'll get onto your real specialist subject around legacy and later life and how we can start thinking about that. So yeah, please let us know. How are we sitting here today?
Well, I'm 68, so I'm going to have to shorten my life story because we'd be here forever. But I was born with missing some fingers due to thalidomide. My mother happened to take, but of course nobody knew that at the time. And when my mother found out when I was about 6 that thalidomide had, she had taken some, I ended up with no fingers. She was, made the connection that and felt guilty, thought that she had caused this, which of course nobody caused it. It just happened. And she went into an institution for the rest of her life. So I lost her the first time when I was 6. I lost her the second time at 17 when she took her own life. And so life was not so good. It was great when my mother was there. She was a fabulous mother. She was broken in many ways, but she was the most kind, loving, caring mother ever. I got everything I needed to live from those first 6 years. Anyway, I ended up meeting this really cute guy in undergraduate when I was 17, who wanted to go to dental school. And in those days in the 70s, there weren't many women in dentistry, but I thought, hey, if I got a good job like being a dentist, he might marry me. And he did. So I went to dental school, married the guy first, went to dental school. We had a great life. We had a small practice in a small town. We were very active in the community. We had 3 amazing children that we just loved to death. And but our world exploded on January 31st of 2009, when our beautiful youngest son, brilliant guy, recruited to Columbia on the student council in Columbia, on the dean's list in engineering in Columbia, playing in the jazz bands at Columbia University in New York, took his own life 45 minutes after the breakup with a girlfriend. We had just seen him 2 weeks before. He was on top of the world and suddenly gone. And, he had one of the problems of being a jazz pianist is you're very impulsive. That impulsive brain combined with a brain not fully developed in critical thinking was just a terrible cocktail. And it came so unexpectedly, and it just destroyed our world. And we had to learn to survive. And I learned from I just tell a quick story about grief. I had one of my husband's cousins was talking to him in the parking lot about a couple of weeks after Eric died, and we were still in that zombie phase. We're in the bottom of the grief pit. We couldn't breathe. You're just trying to snuff, the muddy dirt, trying to stay alive, and you're walking around dead on the inside, trying to, look like a human being on the outside. And he came up to me angrily, and he had his finger, and he was waving his finger in my face, and he said, "Don't you ever let your remaining children feel that they are not enough." And it caught me like a lightning bolt, because he had lost his brother at about the same age, about 19, and he felt he lost his parents at the same time. So his parents, he felt, were so focused on being consumed in their grief, which, I was, that they couldn't attend to their living children. And so it was such a gift that he gave me, because it was a shock to my system. So I was right then realized that my grief affected everybody around me, and I had to fight and kick and scream and claw my way out of that grief pit so I could attend to my 2 living daughters who were also suffering, and my husband, who had just had a liver transplant 6 months before my son had died. So the next few years were getting out of that grief pit. It took a long time, but I can breathe the fresh air again, and I'm here fully without the shroud of grief over me. And so I just want anybody out there going through a grief experience to know it's worth it to get out there and fight your way out. It's not going to happen easily, but you got to fight, So anyway, that was just a little aside. But Anyway, so things went on, but then I lost my husband 4 years ago. He had a long struggle with a broken heart after my son died. And at that time, here I'd been a successful dentist. I had after 30 years, had some problems with my good hand. I had nerve damage in my good hand of all places. So what the heck, everything was falling apart. My identity as a mother, my identity as a dentist. I couldn't provide a good income anymore. I was a breadwinner. So like everything, all my plans that I had made, we had lots of really good plans for our retirement. We bought a cabin. We were working on those things. Puff of smoke, they were gone. And then when my husband died, which was 4 years ago, I sat back and I thought, okay, what do I do now? I was a mother. I was a wife, daughter, but where am I now? I found myself as a widow in that place between menopause and death. And those are the two sides. It wasn't a graduation from, it's like, oh, death is coming. And I thought, well, okay, so what do I do with that? Right. And I realized I'm 68. I realized that I am in the fourth quarter of my life and I have to do what I can in the fourth quarter of my life to take care of my major priorities, which is my family. I have 6 amazing grandchildren that I just love to death, 2 daughters, 2 son-in-laws, and a large extended family. So what do I do? And I started realizing that there really is no instruction book for this time. We just kind of wing it and we pretend we're not going to die. We pretend that if we eat right and we exercise and we do all these things, we're going to live forever. And so we just, we have that in our head. So I started researching this time of life. I researched legacy, and I just happened to have a lot of amazing stories about people in my life who had left a legacy to me. I work in Rwanda. You could do a whole podcast on the forgiveness and reconciliation and building a new culture, a beautiful place to live from the Rwandans. I knew a Holocaust survivor. There are people that I knew that had overcome great, great, great tragedies and live to be fully functioning, joyful human beings. So I kind of dedicated my life to that, and I started writing. I'd written a widow's book before to help with widows, a Christian devotional, but I wanted to write a book that would just help us, guide us through this fourth quarter of our life and do it joyfully. And so I wrote the book, Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For. First part of it is on all these legacies like joy, love, laughter, 15 legacies, and there's thousands of them that we can leave our families, positive legacies that we can leave behind so we kind of live on forever in those legacies. The second part was facing death and dying, and I became a death doula so I could be informed in that area. But the last part is a whole workbook on all the steps you need to take to get ready to go. And a lot of them are financial. Get your will, get your healthcare directive, get all these things done. But I also talk about leaving love letters, Valentine's. The most famous love letter of all time, a Valentine, was written to be delivered after St. Valentine's death. Look at that impact. And so write Valentines to your family. I have them all in a binder. So when I go, all my stuff is in a binder. All my titles to my car, my social security, all the birth certificate, all that stuff is in a binder and page protectors. But there's also some love letters in there. So when my family goes and opens up that binder, first of all, I hope they think, oh, Mom must have loved us because she put this all together, right? But then, just in case they don't get it, because sometimes, maybe they don't get it. But just in case, then they'll see the Valentines. And I specifically tell them how much I love them and how proud I am of them in those little Valentines in the card. So that's what I just want this generation to leave the next generation stronger and help them have a softer landing by talking about grief and death. That was a short version, really.
I mean... Firstly, Kim, thank you. Look, you this is your passion, and obviously your lived life, and you talk about this a lot. So you talk about it with I don't know what the word is, but you talk about it with so much humility. You've been through a lot. You talk about it in a way that obviously doesn't do any justice to what you've been through because you articulate it. You know it. But I just want to say thank you for opening up and actually, God, if we weren't hitting record, I'd probably stop because it's had that. That was just so impactful and so insightful.
Thank you,
and thank you for sharing this stuff as well. Because I think what's really easy for people to do is go through, and the truth is everyone goes through stuff, and some people go through more. And as you said, friends that have, and I think the more people that are brave enough to share their story allows a deeper impact and positives to come out of everything that we go through. And you don't have to share it on international stages or through books either, right? You've been brave enough to do that, but we can share it with friends and family and churches and communities, etc. Right? You can make an impact wherever. So, yeah, and I just want everyone to know that's why Kimberly's on this podcast and why we're going to have such a great conversation for the next 45 minutes about this stuff, because not only is this, what you're doing and you're getting to know how this works, this comes from a different place for you in such a personal place. So there's a couple of points I want to touch on, Kim, if I may. Firstly, I want to talk about kind of grief for a second, because I talk about, and I've delivered a few presentations with this in around actually retirement, and we'll come back to that word in a second because it's boring and we know that. But the phase of life, right? This second half of life, fourth quarter, third act, retirement. There's a number of things going around. Actually, is even without the tragedy and the stuff that happens, I think it is almost a form of grief anyway, because there's the Kubler-Ross grief curve that's out there that kind of gives you the emotions that you go through when you go through the end of something into the transition and the new stage of life. And a lot of those emotions that people have, even with more kind of mundane, normal retirements, are one of loss and grief and depression and anger and bitterness, and then maybe a little bit of hope, and then a little bit of like joy at the other end. So I'd really just like to spend a couple of minutes on that. I think this stage of life can include that, as well as the grief and conflict that things like what you've been through with family members or close friends as you get to this stage in life can have, right?
Right. Well, my it's interesting because I failed retirement. I always thought that's what I wanted. My goodness, I'm going to work really hard, save up money, then I could retire, and that's going to be the best part of life. And then I retired, and I thought, well, what do I do now? And we're all different. Some people, retirement, going to places that are fun to be with and active, and they have an active lifestyle, that is fabulous, and I think it's wonderful for them. Everyone's different in how they manage retirement, but my personal thing is that I need purpose when I get up. Because especially after you're a widow, you get up and you're all alone. You get up and you're like, I was married at 19. I've never been alone. I'm all alone, and you have to kind of adjust to all those things. And what I found was that I needed to have a purpose. So I never thought I'd be writing. Our goal, my husband and I had planned this wonderful retirement where we bought a cabin on this beautiful lake in northern Minnesota. We were going to go there and fish, and I work with porcelain. I paint porcelain and do clay stuff, and I had a little studio up there. And that's, so I was really going to be a little busy anyway in retirement, but that was going to be our retirement. And when my husband when I retired, because I had a problem with my hand, I didn't really know what to do. And I had to just kind of start to look around to come up with another purpose for me, a way that I could feel that I was making a difference in other people's lives. And when I mean other people's lives, it might have just been my family. It doesn't have to be, I'm a little bit of an overachiever, writing books and stuff. That's just, that's just my issue, right? But my husband also, which was interesting, because he had become ill over time, and he retired in 2015 from dentistry. And, when you retire, he kind of gave up his license, and he just thought, I'm going to retire. But he got bored too. After about a couple of years, he went back and had to go through all the steps to get his license back. If he just kept it, it would have been fine. So he also found that he liked to teach. So he did something different. He taught. And what I find, instead of retirement being having no purpose, I really think that retirement is a time to reinvent ourselves. Like I never knew I could write a book. I was working on teeth my whole life. There's so many things I'm doing right now that I never expected. And one of the wonderful things that happened was that we had my two remaining daughters are both attorneys. We were trying to get them to dentistry as we were working, because both of us had this office. It would have been so wonderful to have the dynasty, the children coming and taking over. And of course they worked there, but they said, no, we're not doing this. We want to go into law. So they became lawyers, but they came back, because when they managed our transition from selling our practice, my oldest daughter said, Mom, this transition thing is great, because I know all about the dental industry because I worked in it. And I'm doing family law, and I'm getting really kind of burnt out because of the kids, what happens to kids and divorces and stuff. She goes, but in dentistry, when I transition these practices, it's just like family law, except there's no kids. And so it's really so much better. So she started a dental law firm and said, Mom, can you be my consultant? So I was able to kind of then get back into the profession that I had studied so hard for so many years. And that was really helpful. And then as I was doing that, I started writing some books for my dental seminars on grief and managing things within an office. And that just kind of transitioned when Jim passed away into these other books. So I just find that I'm kind of recreating myself. I downsized. I live now in a little condo, and I'm going to move part-time down to Kansas City so I can be with both sets of grandchildren part-time. I'm going to be like they call a snowbird, except I'm not going all the way down to Florida. I'm going to Kansas City from Minneapolis, because my life now, I have this life where I'm writing and I'm speaking and I'm talking about death. But then I also have the life where I'm trying to live that legacy and bring those qualities to those 6 little grandchildren and help them become more resilient after I go.
Question has just popped into my mind that I really want to ask. And what I want to try and do is make sure I don't forget the question I actually was going to originally ask, but I want to ask this one. Do you think understanding our mortality, understanding and planning for death and confronting death allows us to live more?
Absolutely, yes. And one of the things that happens when you get ready, when you have all your stuff together, because you never know, death comes unexpectedly. I could get hit by a truck today. You never know. When you have that done, there's a sense of peace. So I have got my little binder all ready to go. So if something happens to me, my kids are in great shape. And before I had that done, I kind of thought, oh, if something happens, they're not going to know where this is. They're not going to know where that is, or they're going to miss this. So I think understanding your mortality and preparing for it is something that frees you then to live your life and know that if something were to happen, everything's going to be fine with your family. And I really recommend that people get together and do it as groups, because I think the hardest part is we just procrastinate.
Do you also think it gives you a better concept of time? I think before we hit record, you said something along the lines of people think they're going to live forever, or there isn't this kind of, and because it's an unknown, I think it's really challenging. It's really challenging to think, but I also do know, having work with people at this stage of life, that the people that live their best life at this stage of life and are doing the most things and having the most fun are the ones that are prepared and are very comfortable kind of with it. They know that time is not, a year in your 80s is very different to a year in your 60s, right? And so
yes,
they know that they need to take advantage of time because they've confronted the end, so to speak.
Yes. I've been fortunate that my husband was the 12th of 14 children, and I was 7 years younger than him. So my sisters and brothers-in-law are in their 80s and 90s now. And so we are approaching that time, and I'm seeing the decline that takes place, which helps me to realize that at 68, I better do whatever, as much as I can now, because I just, I got the arthritis, I got the new hip, I've got all the things that happen to you when you're 68. And I better just take advantage of my time now and live fully now. And I've got my stuff ready, so I can do that. Live fully now and be in the lives of my family now, because I can see some of the limitations that may occur in the future.
There's one question I want to ask, and it's the one I wanted to originally, before we kind of delve into, I think, a few real key topics of your wonderful book. And I mentioned this before we hit record again, and to say that, I've obviously done a bit of due diligence. I've prepared for this conversation. I've looked at the book, and I've looked at some notes of yours and different things, and wrote some stuff. And I've got 2 pages of notes that I've got here. I've also had the conversation with you at the start, and we've had a few email things, back and forth with email. And not in any of this is the word retirement, which I find interesting, right? And so you mentioned something I think is really profound. I do think retirement, in a modern sense, is a binary thing. It's either success or failure. And you mentioned you'd failed at retirement, or you believe you did. And I think people have that in their mind, and that's why they sometimes shy away from it, because it's either that my retirement is either going to be successful or it's going to fail. There's nothing in between. And that's why I really love actually kind of everything that you've talked about, and how you've now defined yourself and part of your identity as a 4th quarter coach, I think is really fascinating. Just give me a couple of minutes on that, this retirement thing and why you're not referencing it, and why you believe that it's
Well,
probably a bit of a dead duck.
I thought that was my goal in life, was to retire, and that's what we planned for. But what I found was I felt kind of empty when I was just retired. I didn't have a purpose, or I didn't have something to do, something to keep me busy. Researching was wonderful. I love to research things. And there's a fabulous book that was talks about, I can't remember it, unfortunately, the name, but it talks about an 80-year happiness study at Harvard University, where they found, and the numerous studies have also demonstrated the same thing, that our happiness in life is not dependent on material goods. I mean, you have to have enough to live. I mean, we all need that basic amount of money to live on. But after that, our happiness isn't how much money we have or how many rounds of golf we can play. Our happiness is based upon the quality of our relationships. And that's what I've been focusing on, building quality relationships. I have an extended family, and I was just, last Friday I was at the football game of one of my second grandnephews. I try to become part of their lives, and I try to let them know that they are loved and they're valuable. And the wonderful thing about that, this is an incredible thing, is when you do that, it comes right back at you. I mean, you feel good helping other people feel good. It's a crazy situation. It's a win-win. You can't lose doing that. So I really kind of found that I focus on that. And I also have had a wonderful group of friends that I focus on. But even people, we live kind of in a lonely generation sometimes. And I think that the key is to go out there and find things to do, volunteer, get out in the community, because it's so easy just to kind of, if we're retired, we get up and we just kind of stay in our homes and wait for things to happen. The key is, just like with the grief pit, you got to fight your way out. And with aloneness too, you got to fight your way out and go out there and you make the call. I think sometimes people have expectations of others that also help them to feel more lonely, because they expect other people to call them. They expect the kids to call them. Well, I just don't have any expectations about anybody. I just go call them. I think that's a big helper. So just take the initiative and don't expect other people to take care of you. You go out there and take the initiative to get out there yourself and develop those relationships.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So your book, Kim, I think the title is wonderful. Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For. So I want to spend the next 20 minutes talking about how you think the listeners could start to think about how to build a legacy to die for. And I want to start it off by saying that the vast, vast majority, if not all, that you define legacy as has nothing to do with money. And you're building a legacy right now with your family, by sharing experiences and memories with them, writing the letters. One of my real hates is the way that the financial industry has adopted and ruined two words. One of them is wealth and one of them is legacy. They've adopted those two words and they've ruined them, because actually the origins of wealth has nothing to do with money, and the origins of legacy has nothing to do with money, and yet everyone now associated those two wonderful words with money. So what I want to do is so you mentioned about the love letters. I really want to kind of start there and thinking about those. How would someone start to think about what to do around that, and why is it really important to have those as part of
Well, I received a love letter from my mother, before she took her life, and it was just a simple card that just said, "All my love, always, Mom." I had all three of us, my brother and sister also, got the same card with $5 in it, and her total net worth was $15. So, she basically wrote us a letter that let us know that she loved us even though she was leaving us. And it was a profound thing for me to get that. But I think that when you're going through the grief of a loss and you're just struggling with that, one of the best ways we can help our families beyond the grave is to remind them after we're gone. Even tell them, first of all, tell them you love them a lot. Just keep doing it. Just tell them and tell them often. But by getting something after you're gone, it just reinforces to them that they were loved and that you were proud of them and that you want them to have a great life. You want them to flourish. Because so frequently when we go through grief, we feel guilty when we start feeling better again. and we feel like, oh, I can't feel better. My husband died. I can't laugh. Well, you're going to mourn for a while, but eventually, you want to move forward from that grief pit, and eventually you can laugh again. And my husband would want me to laugh again. My son would want me to laugh again. My mother would want me to laugh again. So I think that those are the important things to put in that letter. And because I know a lot of people don't like to write, I have templates in the book. So I have templates for apology letters. I have templates for forgiveness letters. I have templates for reconciliation letters. I have templates for love letters to send to your kids. So even if you can't write, you can just fill in the blank. And also, even just a card. If you just, like my mother's had 3 words, all my love, 4 words, all my love, always mom. If you just maybe just even buy a Valentine card where someone else creates a sentiment and just put, I just want you to know how much I love you, big heart, bam, that you can do that. Just some sort of a remembrance after you're gone that they can hold in their hand and just remember, my mom really loved me. And I think that's just such an important thing to do for your family. And also, one thing I'm also going to try to do, I haven't done this yet, is to buy some little gifts for like that first birthday after I'm gone, the first Christmas after I'm gone. And then you can even write letters for if you get married, if you have children. But you have to give those letters to a third party, because not everyone's going to get married, not everyone's going to have children. So you really don't want them to read those letters just in case that doesn't happen. But there's lots of letters that you can write, lots of ways you can make an impact even after you're gone by just letting them know how much you thought of them.
That's a really interesting point, Kim, because I think everyone says that they need to appoint their attorneys, right? People to help them with their financial and health decisions if they were ill, or appoint their executors to carry out their will when they pass away. But if you think about this as well, you would want to appoint trusted people to deliver that stuff. That's a real key,
Yes.
And have maybe a couple of them, because you don't want them to get lost in when you write these people listening, make sure that they are part of your gift away. Make sure they're part of the will or the letter of wishes, or your executors, or your whoever you trust that knows exactly what to do with these things. Because as you said, I think a lot of people would write them for moments, particularly, you'd kind of go, whether they're birthdays or weddings, and but these are moments that might not happen or might happen in different stages. And I think that's really, really important that you find those people that will want to carry on your wishes and legacy afterwards, because that will guarantee that it happens. And you've just made me think of something that really hasn't, until we've had this conversation, that hasn't really come to mind. I've talked about my wife's situation a bit on the podcast before. My wife's mum passed away 16 years ago when she was 4 months pregnant with our first child. And it was 6 weeks from diagnosis to passing away. It was really, really quick and sudden. It kind of was I can't remember the exact time scale. It wasn't long. It was probably about 6 to 10 hours before she actually passed away. And I think, as it often happens, they get this kind of new lease of energy. Something happens to people right before they tend to pass away. And my wife's mum so my wife's name's Diane, and her nickname for some reason is Din, D-I-N. But my wife's mum just got this bit of paper, tore it off the edge of something, I can't remember what it was, and then wrote "Love you, Din" on it. And it was crumpled. Her handwriting was horrendous. You can make it out. Handed it to her, and that brings my wife a lot of comfort, even though it was in such a kind of horrible moment. That piece of paper is still in her drawer, but side where she sleeps, cherished for her, and it brings her that. And I think you can't underestimate the power of those. You won't see the power of them, but they will be powerful.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Those last minute statements or statements beyond the grave are so powerful, because the emotion. So you're grieving, your wife was grieving the passing of your mother even before she passed. And yet through her grief, the mother was showing that she loved her so much that she wanted to absolutely make sure she knew, just in case. And I think that's one of the reasons those Valentines are so precious, because just in case, it's all said. And also important to just tell our family how much we love them all the time. One of the things that was comforting when Eric died was we always, before we hang up on the phone, we always say, I love you, Eric. And so he heard that because he, within the last couple of weeks had talked to all of the family members. He heard from every family member. The last thing he heard from them was, "I love you, Eric," before they hung up the phone. And so making that kind of something that you do on a regular basis can be very comforting if something does happen.
A lot of the conversation that we've had is centered around kind of communication, how we communicate to our loved ones. And I think a crucial element of building this legacy to die for is to navigate quite difficult conversations with our family. Have you got any? I know you have. It's a loaded question. Of course you have. But, kind of any thoughts around how we can start, firstly, to navigate those conversations? And secondly, why does our culture shy away from these conversations in the first place? Why does that happen? And then how can we have those really, really important conversations that bring us that sense of peace and allow us then to kind of move forward in the fourth quarter with our family?
Well, our culture is kind of a death-denying culture. So I think when we talk about death, we're kind of going against that idea that we're really, we're just going to eat well and do these things and we'll just keep going. So our culture just has to change, I think, for us to be healthier after death. But what I did is I have two daughters, and they're very different. What you'll find is that the family's reactions to your discussion about death are going to be different. Some people are like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about it," and some people are, "Yeah, we need to get that information." And I have two daughters that are like that. One of them is like, "Yeah, Mom, let's get the information," right on top of it, and the other one's like, "Nah, Mom, I don't know if I want to talk." But I said, "Okay, I know you don't want to, but this is here, and here." And I just kind of laid it out. And sometimes you just write it out. If they're afraid to talk about it, I just want you to know this is here. And I think if you say to them at a family gathering, like a Christmas, or we have Mother's Day here, I would say on a Mother's Day, "Hey, for my Mother's Day gift, I want to have a talk about the future." And then you kind of lure them in because it's a gift, right? Your gift to me is talk about the future. And then you get back in and then you have that conversation. Try to do it as, in a light way. One thing that's important if you have a serious conversation about where things are going to go and what's going to happen is to record it on your phone. And the reason is we all remember things differently. It's amazing how people can be in the same room and hear two different things. So record it, especially if you're talking about, Henry's going to get a little more because of this, or this is going to happen because of this or this, anything that's unusual. Record it so that you have it, and then send it to the people that are involved so that they all have a recording of it so they know what was said. And so there's no dispute, because what you want to do is avoid disputes after your death, right? Because that's when they have those big conflicts occur after you're dead because they think things are done incorrectly. But I also talk about death to my grandchildren because I want them to have a softer landing when I go. And after your Pop-Pop died, I talk to them about Pop-Pop frequently. In fact, when I give Christmas gifts, I say they're from Nana and Angel Pop-Pop. I just kind of keep his memory alive. And I talk about, one day I'm going to be gone too. And, I just want you to live a good life and live joyfully and so on and so forth. And I know this works because I had an experience. A few months ago, my little granddaughter, she was 7 at the time, Heidi, looked up at me and she goes, "Nana, if what happens to Pop-Pop happens to you." And I said, "Oh, Heidi, do you mean if I were to die?" She goes, "Yeah, Nana, if you were to die." And I said, "Go on, Heidi. You know what? If I were to die, what?" She goes, "Well, if you were to die, can we still go to Disney World?" And I was like, yes, you can go to Disney World. I want you to be happy. I want you to flourish in your life. I want you to be strong. I want you to be resilient. Yes, go to Disney World. In fact, go to Disney World on me. I mean, just, let's have fun. And so I know that works because I want them to realize that when I die, I want them to have a good life. I don't want them to be stuck in mourning my loss or prolonged grief. There's going to be grief. You got to work through that. But I don't want it to be prolonged. I want it to be a healthy grief. And so it does work.
What's fascinating about that, I don't want to bring it back into money for the sake of it at all, right? But if you think of that conversation that you've had with Heidi, and that enables you to maybe go back and go, "Well, do you know what? One of my gifts to Heidi is to go to Disney World on Nana. And so I'm going to make sure there's, and I mean, Disney World's expensive. I've been there once. But I'm going to make sure that part of my legacy is to leave a gift of money specifically for Heidi and the grandchildren to go to Disneyland, and make sure that my executors and my beneficiaries and my children understand that this was from me, and go and have fun. And until you have those conversations, you have no idea how to place that money, that gift, that memory, that experience post your death. And I know people that have had similar conversations, which really allows them to kind of understand exactly what is going to happen post death and allocate the thing. And again, you can write the letter, you can write this, you can do that, and you can deliver that, and that's going there, and you know what's going to happen, and you're going to bring some joy because you've talked about it. You've talked about it beforehand.
Yes, absolutely. And just imagine, I mean, I'm, of course, I'm a Christian. I think I'll be up there in heaven watching over them. So I think I'm going to be able to see this at some time. But just imagine the joy from all parts, no matter what happens to me, when they go and they have a fun time and they think about Nana. I want them to think about me as adventure Nana. That's my goal in life, is when they think about me, they think about me taking them on adventures and showing them new things. And that's one way just to preserve my legacy. It's another legacy preservation, that's what's important to me. So it's a great idea to put money aside. In fact, I hadn't put it for that specific trip, but I'm going to do that now. Thank you.
There's a couple of other topics I want to touch on that I think are really important. One is and you've mentioned this a couple of times, you're moving from Minnesota to Kansas. To Kansas City. I'm a massive NFL fan and NBA fan, right? So my geography is reasonably good in America, because I just, you're moving from Minnesota, which has got the Vikings, to watch the Chiefs. Yes. And so, but you're doing that for a reason. And part of, I think, building a legacy to die for is to understand the emotional well-being in downsizing. And that's kind of what you're doing. I'd love to just get your take on kind of what and why and how and what it's going to bring to you going forward, and why everybody should consider this as part of their building their legacy.
We were very fortunate. We didn't downsize intentionally at first, but we were very fortunate. My husband and I had a home in Farmington, big home, and we had twins that were about an hour away, and we just had to get closer to them. So we had this little, our retirement home was up north, and we had this we just bought a little tiny condo, just a little tiny thing that we could live in until we retired, up to our cabin, which of course never happened, but we were in this condo. So we kind of downsized that first time, even before my husband died. And so when he did die, that made it so much easier for me, because I already had downsized quite a bit, but we still had that cabin, and the cabin was also large. So we had dreams that this cabin was going to be in our family for generations, and they would be so grateful to us for building this up in the North Woods. But we found out that our kids didn't want the cabin. They had other cabins to go to, this particular cabin. And of course, that was devastating. It's devastating to know that your kids don't want your stuff, but it's just reality. So you just have to get tough and take it, right? They don't want our stuff. So I sold the cabin, but it was a big cabin. I had a lot of stuff in it. So it was very painful. Downsizing is painful while you're going through it, because it's hard to get rid of stuff, but it is freeing when you're done. It's freeing when you're done. So now I had a little studio, because I work with clay and up there. And so I realized that what I could do is, instead of having, a home, I have two tiny little condos or apartments. So I have a little tiny condo here, and then I'm going to get a little tiny condo down in Kansas City. And then I will have time to spend months at a time with both of my families. But I have 3 grandchildren here, and I have 3 grandchildren now there. Now, when it comes to football, right now, the Vikings and the Chiefs are both doing pretty well. So I could go either place,
I think they're both unbeaten, aren't they? They're the only 2 teams that are still unbeaten. 4-0, I think. 4-0.
Yeah, it's the Kansas people are used to this, but it's a new experience for us up here in Minnesota. We've had some. We would get so excited. They were 15-0 one year, and then they went awry, and that blew that years ago. So I guess what I can do. The nice thing about it too is that, when I can hang on to the one that's doing the best, so if one team loses, I can go, okay, I'm going to go and cheer for this team. So it's kind of fun. But the reason I'm doing that is I want to play a daily role in the lives of my grandchildren. The ones here in Minnesota are getting older. I used to babysit for them quite a bit, but they're getting older. Their dad's staying at home. My daughter's business is doing well, so they don't need me as much anymore. They're getting older. And the ones in Kansas City are still young, and they can use an extra grandma around down there. But what I'm doing is I'm focusing my life on what's important to me. And it's the relationships between my two daughters and my son-in-laws and my grandchildren. That's the most important thing to me right now. And so I'm changing my life to focus on what's important. And I got rid of the stuff because you know what? It's just stuff. And I take pictures of it though. So if I want to look at it, I can take pictures of the important. I can take a look at it. And all my photos, the boxes of photos, I just took pictures of them and they're on my phone. So I can look at them whenever I want, but they're just in my little phone. So it doesn't take up any space. But getting rid of stuff is the pits. I just have to say it's like going through the grief pit, going through the get rid of, it is part. It's like a grief pit. You're getting rid of the stuff. So the getting rid of is difficult. Get somebody to help you. Yeah. Because I needed someone to say, Mom, you don't need that. Mom. And I really don't. Oh, okay. It's gone, So it's hard, but it is I feel so free now. And also what I've done is I followed my instructions about trying to make life easier for my children, because I also put in my will that when I go, that the kids can go through and take whatever they want, and then the extended family can come through and take whatever they want. And when they're done doing that, I hired a company. There are companies all over now designed just to do this. And they just swoop in, take your stuff and either sell it or get rid of it, whatever you wanted to do with it. They do it. And you don't have to spend a year going through your mother's farmhouse, clearing out all those closets that have been there for 20, 30 years. My kids won't have to do that. And of course, typically that falls on one child. The child that's closest is usually the cleaner outer, right? And then that's how some resentment can kind of form. I mean, all those things that happen after you die, where one child has to take responsibility over the other, that can build resentment. So I'm trying to make it so that it's going to be as easy as possible. When I die, someone's going to clean out my stuff. They got everything in one book. And now I'm going to put a new clause in that they are going to Disneyland. It's going to be in my will. So, although I might not tell them that right away because I don't want them to look forward to my death. I don't want to make it too much fun. But at the time, they're going to appreciate it.
I think it's really interesting. There's a couple of things that have sprung to mind. I think minimalism is a movement that is gathering a huge amount of pace, right? There's lots of books written about it. I might have one behind there. I don't know. I can't remember the author's name. Very famous guy about minimalism, and there's huge amounts of benefits, right? I don't understand why people don't do this more. I do understand, right? There is an emotional attachment to the house or the possessions, but as you've rightly said, actually, I think long run emotional well-being is better by not having them. So minimalism is a hard thing to have, but it also does allow you to kind of build that legacy of love because you are not leaving behind, stuff to deal with. My father-in-law does joke with me. He has got a garage that is, I think, he's basically got about 4 or 5 of every tool that's ever been made. And he comes around and laughs. He's in his 80s. He's like, I can't wait. But he said, I'm not going to be here, but I can't wait to see your face from up above when you have to go into the garage and clear this thing out. I'm like, Roy, you can't say, this is going to be horrendous. Can't you get rid of it now for me? But I think that's really interesting and really important. The other thing you talked about was talking to your kids. And so I've got a number of stories, and you mentioned the business thing with the children. I've got a number of stories where they thought their legacy would be passing on the business to their children. And the simple question is, have you had a conversation with your children about passing the business on? And they were like, oh no, but don't worry, they will, that's kind of, they'll want it. And then I go, well, go and have a conversation with them. And then 2 months later, 3 months later, they come back and they go, I've had the conversation. Both children couldn't think of anything worse. So now, like, all my plans are now up in the air. And so the ability to feel like you can downsize everything and move everything around, get rid of the stuff, whether it is a business, whether it is a house, whether it is a garage full of tools, that allows you to just kind of allow everyone to move forward thereafter. I think the emotional well-being in downsizing, and as you said at the Harvard study, having positive relationships, a circle of social connections, both family and friends, is so important. I know people that had a long dream of moving to the coast. The coast was 3 hours away from their family. They did that, and within 6 to 9 months, they'd moved back to, because they were like, well, I can't build, like, I'm trying to build a new life here and I can't do it, and it don't. So do your research, find out where you want to be, find out where your family and your friends are, and make sure that you're not just staying put because it feels like the easiest thing to do.
Absolutely. And I know I have so many friends from the dental field. Many families have, children that go to dental school and join the practice and so on and so forth. Trying to get that worked out after a death is a mess. I mean, it causes breaks in the relationships that sometimes last a lifetime. So get that worked out beforehand. I mean, it really should be worked out beforehand while you're still there.
This has been I think we could probably talk for at least 2 hours, probably a day. I've got one final question. You talk about how to plan for a grateful but not yet dead tour, which, again, I think, the language is one of humor and seriousness behind it. How can the listeners for a grateful but not yet dead tour?
Well, since strong relationships make you happy, this is a happiness tour, because what I did is after my son died and I then I couldn't work anymore, I had some time on my hands, I started going around to the people that had made a difference in my life. And there were several uncles that had kind of taken us under their wing, when my mom was sick and so on. So I went back around the country and visited them and told them how much I appreciated what they did. I just wanted them to know they made a difference in my life. And one of them was in hospice and he couldn't really talk, but he looked up at me, he grabbed my hand, and a tear came down. And a tear came down from my eye too, because I know that I made an impact on him and his family who were standing around, to see that he was appreciated for some years of work just taking care of his niece, just kind of watching over my mom. And we lived with my mom and my grandmother, and he was there and he showed a lot of love to his niece. And I wanted him to know how important that was to me. And I went to another uncle from the other side down in Kansas City and did the same thing. And it was a wonderful thing for me. And it was a wonderful thing for them. Again, win-win. Building relationships, helping people out is a win-win for both. Both sides get a happiness, splurge or spurge or whatever that would be. I can't think of the word right now, but we have splurge. Thank you, because I'm 68 and those words sometimes they just don't come out. But that it's a very important thing to just be grateful and thank them for what they've done for you. And it helps you out too.
Kim, this has been, as I said, such a humbling, heartwarming, inspiring conversation for me. I don't care if no one downloads this. I've had such an amazing conversation. People will download it. I know that for a fact, and listen to it. But this has been so phenomenal. Thank you for coming on, having the conversation, for sharing your story, for sharing your wisdom, your advice, your guidance on this, because it's a difficult subject that hardly anybody talks about, that probably everybody needs to talk about. So I encourage everybody to go on to Amazon. The other book retailers are available. Links to your book, Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For, will be in the show notes. Buy the book, read the book, do the exercises, make sure that you are building that legacy to die for, and planning that kind of happiness tour. So Dr. Harms, thank you so much for your time. It's been truly magnificent.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. This has been a fun conversation.
And that just leaves me once again to thank everybody for tuning in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Until next time, take care.